That means so much coming from someone like Brooke, right? Who's just this legend in our industry. So thank you so much. He's talking about Let's Talk Software Security, which is a meetup that I started some years ago. It's a 2-hour open discussion every month on an AppSec topic. It's awesome. So definitely recommend signing up for that. I'm going to see if I can work this thing. Yep. All right. So we're going to be talking about preparing for the journey of threat modeling today. Okay. What engineering practices are important to have in place? So let's go ahead and dive in. First of all, a little bit about me. Who is this guy anyway, who's up here on the stage? I was a software engineer and architect for over a decade. Worked for these fine companies, including in the video game industry, which is a whole story in itself. Ask me about that sometime. It's very interesting. And a blank screen. Okay, whew, that was scary. And then I got into cybersecurity leadership, okay? So I was an AppSec leader at Staples and Fivetran. I kind of worked my way into a deputy CISO position at Fivetran as well. And now I do a bunch of stuff, okay? So I do advocacy work. I sort of do thought leadership and these types of engagements. Well, oh, what's going on here? Hopefully that doesn't keep happening. I co-founded Catalyst, and I'm very proud to say that we are sponsoring this event. I do a bunch of consulting, okay, so AppSec, CISO work. I create some silly videos as well. I don't know if any of you have seen any of those, but I have a lot of fun making those. They're about a minute long each. I wrote a guide, the Security Champion Success Guide, to help people build security champion programs. And then I already talked about the meetup as well. So my threat modeling experience is pretty wide at this point. So I do a lot of it through the consulting gigs that I land these days. And then I did roll out threat modeling at both Fivetran and Staples back in the day as well. I do have quite a network of friends, and I talk to them all the time about threat modeling too. So this is kind of how I keep my finger on the pulse, if you will. All right, so some observations about threat modeling that I want to highlight is it's okay. I think we're all on a very unique journey when it comes to threat modeling. I work with a lot of companies, as I mentioned, and no one really has implemented this at scale that I have worked with. Okay, that doesn't mean I haven't heard of these magical programs that are out there. I certainly have, but I think many are on their way. There's just quite the journey, right, when it comes to threat modeling, and we're going to go into that a little bit more today. So what's the problem? And I want to paint a picture here, right, as we scatter the seeds of threat modeling. They can land in one of 4 places, okay? The first, on the path, right? No one really understands threat modeling at the company, and the birds essentially take it away, right? It doesn't take any ground whatsoever, okay? Secondly, the rocks, right? It might sprout quickly, but it's not in fertile soil, so eventually the roots can't grow deep and everything withers away, okay? Thirdly, thorns, okay? So its value may be understood, well, like we get threat modeling, but it's quickly crowded out by other priorities. Can anyone relate to this, okay? Any of these scenarios, any of yours? Actually, quick show of hands. The path, anyone run into this situation? Okay, how about the rocks? Okay, you've seen this situation. How about the thorns? Probably the most common, I would guess, right? Just crowded out by other priorities. So what we really want is we want the seed to fall on fertile soil, right? We want to have an environment where threat modeling thrives ultimately. So that's what we're going to talk about today. I do want to get grounded on what is threat modeling because I think there is some misperception here. Look at this fine character. Everyone familiar with this guy? Love this guy. What I want to point out is in threat modeling, you're really going for using a model, okay? Not an exact representation of your system, but a model of your system, okay? All models are wrong, some are useful, right? So I think that's really important. It's important to note it's looking at the bigger picture, okay? I'm not going to go over this. Everyone knows the 4-question framework, but all of my philosophies around threat modeling is really rooted in these ideas. So I'm definitely a believer in that. I like to start with takeaways. And specifically, I love interactive, games, as we sort of just witnessed with the whole Dungeons and Dragons thing. I'd like you all to start activating your minds here for this talk. See if you can fill in the blanks, okay? And these are the 4 things that I think are necessary to create this fertile soil, okay? So number 1, and feel free to shout it out, okay? Real architectural shortcomings in what? What's your guess? What's that? No. Close. All right, that's all right. We'll come back to this, okay? These are the takeaways, remember? So you're not supposed to know this yet, but there might be a quiz at the end. So pay attention. A proactive culture of, what kind of culture do you need? Not quite. We actually have talked about this quite a bit today. Risk. I love it. I have risk all in this presentation, by the way, so I'm going to be caveating that term during this whole thing. Number 3, a risk-based what kind of system do you need for good threat modeling? Thoughts? What's that? Pretty close. I like where we're going there. And regularly maintained what kind of diagrams? Come on, this is an easy one. Architecture, thank you. All right, so I'm going to fill in the blanks, and then we're going to go over these one by one. Real architectural shortcomings in production. Okay, you want to demonstrate that there are actually issues in production. Okay, we're going to talk about that more. Proactive culture of collaboration. Again, something that we have talked about quite a bit today. I'm going to go into that more. A risk-based asset inventory system, okay, is fertile soil for good threat modeling. And regularly maintain architectural diagrams, as you guys nailed. All right, so I want to frame this conversation around the fact that threat modeling is important, but it's not the place to start, okay? You have to prepare, you have to make a case for it, okay? And I've run into a lot of companies where, maybe they haven't made a strong case to leadership or through exposing real production issues, et cetera. They start doing threat modeling and no one really understands why. Why are we doing this, right? What are we actually trying to avoid? So I think the key, and I'm going to kind of go over this in terms of the strategy that I like to employ when it comes to rolling out an AppSec program in general, I think you have to create a foundation, okay? And the foundation is built on connecting with people across your organization, okay? You can't do anything, you can't accomplish anything in AppSec in general without relationships, right? It's not like you're going to do all of this yourself as the AppSec team in a silo, okay? You need other people. So it's important to connect with people and build real relationships. 2, focusing on finding the issues across your organization, okay? Get really good at that, right? Have coverage, right? Make sure that you're regularly pen testing and scanning and doing all of that stuff. Number 3, get really good at fixing issues as well, right? And then finally, number 4, once you've sort of established this foundation and made a case for doing all these things, now it's time to focus on prevention, right? Which is threat modeling, among other things, like training and a lot of other things that I believe in. So I think that end goal is prevention. I like the term, as opposed to shift left, I like the term start right, expand everywhere. And what I mean by that is try to demonstrate that there are real issues in production, more on this right side, right? And then over time, implement proactive controls as you establish that there are issues, okay? Just to kind of go into this point. So we need to show, again, real architectural shortcomings in production. And that means doing a pen test, right? Or doing a bug bounty program or something like that. Or even just analyzing any incidents, right, that occur at your company. So again, when you do that production analysis, you're going to have one of 2 scenarios, right? Number 1, no issues were found. Yeah, right. Does that ever happen? No. Okay, sorry. Number 2, yes, you found issues in production. Now you can do more of a root cause analysis to figure out what caused those issues. Again, to make that business case for threat modeling and other preventative controls. So again, we need to be more proactive is essentially the conclusion that comes out of that. And I think a lot of us, we know this intuitively and we sort of imagine this world, right, where everyone understands this. But what I'm trying to emphasize is the fact that we need to go through these steps for leadership. We have to bring them along our path, right? Sure, threat modeling is the right thing to do, but if you haven't established a strong case for that, you're gonna struggle throughout your whole journey, okay? So if we need people to be more proactive, this also means something needs to change, okay? Change is a big thing. I like to talk about our AppSec programs as programs of change. Your threat modeling program is essentially a change program, okay? And what that means is you're trying to change behaviors. You're trying to change habits at the end of the day, okay? So start leaning into that as a concept. Change management is a thing. There's a whole field. There's authors who are brilliant, like John Cotter, as an example, who really focus on this concept. And I would encourage everyone to lean into that, right? The more you can learn about how to change or transform your org, the better. This is how change happens, essentially. So this represents a population. Has anyone seen this before, by the way? You know about this? Okay, this is called the diffusion of innovation. And it's essentially how something catches on to a population. Okay, it starts on the very left side here with early adopters and innovators. And then eventually what you want to see is that chasm being crossed so that it eventually reaches the majority, okay? Then you have the laggards. The laggards are hard. And I'm gonna go into this a little bit more, but it's very important to work very closely with your early adopters when you're trying to roll out threat modeling or any sort of preventative control. Don't worry about the laggards yet, okay? We'll reach them over time. So again, start small, change is slow when it comes to threat modeling. Working with those allies and early adopters is extremely important, okay? So starting with even just one focused threat modeling exercise with a friendly team, this is how you do it, right? You can't necessarily just roll everything out at scale overnight, right? You have to take these baby steps and make that case. I want to emphasize this point. So we talked about this a lot today. Collaboration, I think, is the biggest value of threat modeling, not just the result. Okay, so it's actually the activity that you go through, the time that you spend with the engineering team, that is providing the most value. And the way this has come out for me is as I start talking to people about threat modeling, maybe they're like, all right, we'll give you one engineer for a little bit of time and we'll see what we can do. I'm like, no. 2 engineers at least, okay? Because I want people on your own team talking about your system. You would be surprised. Has anyone experienced this? You'd be surprised how much they disagree on the system itself, right? Who has actually experienced this? And is that not like the most valuable thing, right? So they start sorting things out, right? It's amazing. They start sorting things out with each other. And what you've done is you've induced that, right? You've been there as the agent that led them to have that conversation. And they start to see the value in actually talking about this stuff, right? Gets them out of their silo a little bit as well. So again, threat modeling needs a proactive culture of collaboration. All right, so check, right? We've done it with one team, a couple of teams, et cetera. That's good. But now we have to reach the majority. How do we scale, right? How do we grow from that aspect, okay, or from that point? This looks like a bit of a problem. It's called the chasm, okay? Does that sound scary? It is scary, okay? This is a major problem, okay? When you go from early adopters to trying to hit the majority, you run into a lot of roadblocks. Has anyone experienced that? Maybe you've gotten a few threat modeling, teams to threat model, and then you run into essentially a wall. Sounds like you've run into that. Anyone else run into that wall before? Okay, fantastic. Not fantastic, but it's good to hear that we're not alone, right? So, sometimes that's good to hear. So how do we do this? I read this book years ago. Do you guys know about this book, Crossing the Chasm? It's an oldie, but it's a goodie. Okay, and essentially what it recommends when you're trying to cross the chasm, and it's interesting because this is a marketing book. This is how to spread a product, right, across a population using marketing techniques, which I think we should definitely lean into a little bit more. But what they recommend is establishing a beachhead. Okay, Now, what does that mean? And what kind of beachhead are we talking about? Yes, essentially this kind of beachhead, if we're going to get dramatic about the whole thing. But what this basically means is you need to land and expand, okay? So when you're trying to cross the chasm, you're trying to reach the majority of people, again, you can't just roll everything out at once at scale. You have to be very focused in terms of the group that you pursue to be the next adopters of your threat modeling program, okay? And then you have to show results. And then at that point, you've won over more advocates that can speak for you about the value of what you're doing. And that is extremely important. I know it's hard to hear. Sorry, everyone. People will listen way more closely to those that they work with, their colleagues, than to you, okay? So the more that you can win people over for your cause that are embedded on the teams that are out there, the better. And that's really what you need to focus on, okay? You can yell and scream and shout all you want. They're not going to listen to you necessarily unless their own colleagues that are on their team are bought into this concept, okay? Does that make sense? Sweet. All right. So how do we find our beachhead? Well, what would have the highest impact? Now we're talking about prioritization, okay? What systems have the most to gain from threat modeling? So let's talk about that. Asset inventory, okay? And I know I was at was there anyone at Adam's talk yesterday, by the way? Okay, this was one of the ones that he said was very difficult, and I completely agree. So I have two things that he might have an issue with, right? I use the term risk. So I'm gonna get specific about exactly what that means, because I think that was one of the takeaways of the talk, is to get more specific. And then asset inventory. I do think this is a challenge. I have been able to roll out asset inventory systems successfully, though, and I'm gonna share more about what that looks like. But this is essentially how we find where to start, right? Which assets should we focus on when it comes to these initial beachhead threat models? So a lame CMDB is not enough, okay? How many of you have used a CMDB and it was a complete disaster? Yeah, it's kind of sad. There are better ways to do all this. We need an actively maintained and up-to-date, essentially data lake, right? A repository of the data that captures the information across your systems. And we need it to be consistently maintained. The approach that I've used is really tried to focus on relating the vulnerabilities that are out there to things like libraries, right? So having a list of the libraries that are used across your organization, third-party libraries, their versions and so forth, how they map to repositories, right? How those repositories actually map to systems. This mapping can be a little bit difficult if you don't have friends on the engineering side that are gonna help you with that mapping, okay? It's not always intuitive what that looks like. But if you start to collect that, it's really gonna make a big difference. And then all the way to owners. Why would I put owners in there? Is this important to know who's actually maintaining the systems? No, it's not. Thank you. I love the sarcasm over there. 100%. So mapping all of that, I think, is extremely important when it comes to creating an asset inventory system. Let me pause really quick. Any questions about that so far? I have more details to share, but is this making sense? Cool. All right. Everyone's on board? Everyone's tired? Did you have enough coffee? Okay, good. It's been a long few days. So again, relate systems to others, show dependencies, and then automate that ingestion to your data lake as much as possible. It's not easy, but there are some tools out there to help as well. And then add a risk score. Okay, this is where I get specific about what I mean when I say risk. Okay, so look at things like business criticality, public facing, all of these things. Try to capture that for all the systems and use that information to make decisions about where to start. Only 5 minutes?
Yeah, sorry, I missed the 5-minute mark.
Are you serious? Oh, goodness gracious. All right, so establish a beachhead to cross the chasm. I'm gonna go a little bit faster. Can you keep up?
There's a decision tree here. If you want to, don't want to have Q&A, then you can go.
Yeah, I think I would like Q&A, so I'll kind of speed this up a little bit more. I think lastly, so I already did explain the 4 points that I really want us to make. It's important to know what you're working on as well, right? And establishing a habit there. So you need regularly maintained architectural diagrams. As everyone here knows, how do you actually do that? Again, you have to start with a group that really understands this, and you can land and expand from there as well. Are there any teams that are already out there doing a pretty good job at documenting this and automating this wherever possible as well? It's just a good engineering habit. And I think this is what it comes down to for me. Like, the whole reason I got into AppSec is because I wanted to encourage building high quality software, and I think security is in a really good position to drive that, okay? Sometimes you can use the heavy compliance hammer. Sometimes it's through influence, it's through trying to convince people, right, of the importance of security, but it eventually leads to better engineering practices, hopefully. So I'm gonna go ahead and skip that in the interest of time. I kind of just said this, it's something I say a lot. In order to have a secure SDLC, you must first have an SDLC, right? Which essentially means you're using security to drive better habits across your organization, okay? Let's see, I'm gonna skip that a little bit. Won't AI save us all? I'm actually gonna skip some of that as well and kind of go to the, I love this quote, by the way. Have you heard this before? If you think technology can solve your security problems, then you don't understand your problems, and you don't understand the technology as well. I think that's brilliant. So let's go ahead and go to the takeaways here to leave enough time for Q&A. Did you guys learn anything? Can you guys fill this in now? What do you say? Let's do it. Real architectural shortcomings in production. Yes, you need to start by looking at production to make a case, okay? A proactive culture of collaboration, nice work, a risk-based asset inventory system, and then regularly maintained what kind of diagrams? Fantastic, all right. We have our takeaways, there they are, and that's it. So appreciate it, everyone, thank you. Questions, and sorry we had to rush a little bit there at the end, but anyone have any questions? Emily?
Whoa.
Yes.
You gotta have the mic.
Oh, you gotta have a mic. She just said go back to this slide.
Okay.
Is the order you have there like a waterfall? Like does it one and the next, or like parallel? Some of those things are. What's that?
You know, some of these can certainly be done in parallel. So I talked about building a foundation which involves connecting with people, and I think that's when you're starting to have more collaboration in general, right? You're building good relationships and partnerships across your org. So that's a really good place to start. But in terms of, you know, before you go to ThreatMod, I mean, honestly, a lot of these can sort of be done in parallel for the most part. But I do think number one is important to start with, because I think most of your efforts are going to be based on whether you've made a case, right? Is there anything actually wrong in production or not, right? Like, should I go home, or is there a lot to work on here? And when you explain that to leadership, you know, hopefully you get the money and the budget and everything and the time to actually put the right practices in place. So does that help? Cool. Other thoughts or questions?
Dustin, if you had to give, in the shortest version possible, your secret sauce for how to start to build collaboration, how do you earn that initial buy-in with teams that seem very standoffish about engaging with security?
Yeah, I love that. So I think it starts with listening, okay? And I think this is an important skill for us to build. I think there's a lot of smart people among us, but I think if we really want to build strong relationships with folks, we need to listen to them. Like, what are their concerns? And then tailor your message, tailor everything that you're doing based on what you're hearing across the organization. I do find a lot, you know, I think this is a fallacy more or less, that I think there's a lot of very senior leaders in cybersecurity, et cetera. They've been successful, and that sort of becomes a blind spot, right? They roll into a new company and they're like, this worked for me before, and they just start rolling things out, and they don't listen to, you know, the uniqueness of the culture before starting to do that. So that's where I would start. Hopefully that was concise enough for you. Okay.
Awesome. I have a minute of question, but I just wanted to like maybe say the same thing but in a different way. When you said in order to have a secure SDLC, we need an SDLC. I think you can also say sort of along the lines of what you just said, you need to learn what their SDLC is. Like most organizations have an SDLC, or a lot of them do, I should say, more mature ones. So you can't impose your security on them without knowing what their SDLC is.
Yes, that's very true.
Run into that problem a lot.
Yeah, and I think that comes back to tailoring your approach to the uniqueness of the culture at the end of the day, right? Yeah, I have seen a lot of SDLCs maybe defined, but not out there at scale, right? Like, or several SDLCs might exist. So centralizing them is a really good idea as well. So yeah, other questions?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
How do you keep asset inventories up to date? Just because I feel like mapping phones to libs to repos, that's a full-time job in its own right.
This is a lot of work. So everything that I shared there is a lot of work, but totally doable. And the way that, one of the things that influenced a lot of my thinking here is I worked for Fivetran for a while, right? So they made it very easy to create connectors to pull in data to the data lake that I had created. So this is from various tools, GitHub to scan tools and so forth. I'm not going to name any SaaS tools by name. I'm not sure I like any of them at this point. But I pulled all that data together, and then it was a question of mapping that data, right? And then and we even got HR data too for the people element. And I didn't really have a chance to go into that, but that really made it a lot easier. So yeah. Other questions? Go ahead, Matt.
Dustin, I'm going to ask a question, actually less about threat modeling, more about just something you said earlier, that you don't like start left or shift left, so like start right and shift everywhere.
Yes.
How is that different from what every other company has done with starting right and having to migrate to the leftward direction?
Yeah. I think it's more terminology. Okay, so I do think shift left kind of misrepresents it, right? Because I think some of the issue that I have with the term is that it's almost like you move away from the reactive controls. You're shifting left. You're like, you don't have to worry about reactive controls so much anymore because you're focused on developers writing secure code and all that stuff. That's why I kind of like to reframe it, right? Like start on the right, but then keep those reactive controls in place as you implement the other left side controls.
We need something other than shift. We need migrate.
Migrate, expand. I mean, help me come up with a new term here, but I do want to change that mentality, so.
Yeah, I have a question. It's actually very closely related to what the previous gentleman was asking. You say start right? And I can understand why you were saying that way because I work with products. But it doesn't apply to all the situations, right? For example, when you have a new product, when you are adding a new features, you're doing something new, you can't wait to the end to see what something bad happens.
Right.
So it doesn't apply to all the situations, it only apply to existing situations.
Yeah.
So I want to understand.
It's a really good point, and what I'm trying to express here is like if you're walking into a brand new situation, looking at your production systems is a good first step. But that doesn't mean if they're building new systems that you only look once it's been deployed, right? So I think over time as you build this muscle and you become more proactive in your approach, you do want to review those things before they ever even go into production. And that's what I would describe as proactive sort of shift left controls, right? Before it goes into production, we're doing certain things. Did you have a comment about that too?
We are almost out of time, but I wish we could, I'm going to ask you, can we somehow jettison a flat, linear, because software isn't built linear today. And the shift left, shift right, start right, and all of these really bug me because people have all these continuous loops or nearly continuous loops that are in parallel in DevOps.
Yeah, I've thought about this a lot, and I do like these kind of circular or infinity signs, that show that it's a continuous thing. But I do think for each idea, concept, feature that you want to implement, there's a clear start of that to deployment, and that's really what I'm trying to express when it comes to that. So hopefully it makes sense from that context.
Yeah,
Okay.
It's true, and we struggle with this.
Yeah.
We have to stop, I'm afraid. Why not a big round of applause?
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.